Hi folks, thanks for watching my monologue. As you may have heard, there's been a recent run on guns and ammunition. I just wanted to let you know that Guns Etc. is in a 10,200 square foot building which holds a lot of guns. So Guns Etc. is open and has a lot of product. Or you can go to gunsetc.com, that's gunsetc.com, and if you like my monologue, please subscribe to our channel using 960 The Patriot. Welcome back, April 14th, 2020. We begin today with a necessary redounding to some common sense. As many of you know, and has been quoted elsewhere, Bill Bennett and I have been pointing out the overreactions to the coronavirus that no other ill, social or otherwise, has brought about in America. We've had drug wars in this country and wars against cancer and suicide and domestic violence and drunk driving. Drug deaths alone, merely in overdoses, not other attendant accidents to them, take some 67 to 70,000 lives each year. We do nothing like what we are doing with those things as we do to stave off the coronavirus. We've pointed out we will lose about 650,000 Americans to heart disease this year, 600,000 to cancer. We work on all of those things hard as a society, but we don't make things worse. We don't create iatrogenic responses. This one is different, though, isn't it? Turns out to be, as I've called it, a very privileged illness indeed. It requires, evidently, shutting down everything, including our best forces of composition, from churches and synagogues to exercise facilities. Closes down group gatherings for self-help groups and for recreation. Closes down stores, businesses, malls, restaurants, travel. Where a year ago, some of us were advocating for anti-masking legislation, masking our faces is now required, eerily like something right out of Harrison Bergeron and Kurt Vonnegut. We pit Americans against each other, saying some work in essential or vital jobs and others don't. We pit Americans against each other with some modern code of sanitary virtue signaling as to who is being more responsible and who not. Over, again, what? The what is a projected 68,000 deaths. By the way, that estimate has lower ranges too, in the 30,000s. We are told hospitals will be overrun or would have been. How many hospital beds have been taken and used for this virus? Some 65,000. But there's this other thing out there we're never supposed to talk about, along with the deaths mentioned above, and that's the annual flu. Want to know how many hospital beds it takes a year? How many lives? Some of you know. Anywhere from 30,000 to 60-plus thousand deaths a year. Want to know how many hospital beds? Not the 65,000 needed for the coronavirus, but rather hundreds of thousands. Over 800,000 in the 2017-2018 flu season. Yes, this is why I say this is a very privileged disease indeed. But back to where I started, as Bill and I and others have been trying to point this out so as to restore some sense of reason and calm, rationality, there is a crisis industrial complex, a vested series of interests in silencing those perspectives, attempting to shame us and keeping us in a crisis mode as long as they possibly can. To wit, the Washington Monthly criticized Bill and I for being actual idiots, citing the above numbers because they instruct us things like heart disease cannot be transmitted. The Washington Post singles us out along the same lines. Well, before I thank them for that, let me just say I think they are the idiots for thinking this needed to be pointed out. They missed, or more likely, are deliberately misleading on our point. While heart disease may not be communicated, transmitted, spread virally, or otherwise, it of course can be prevented in large part. We absorb hundreds of thousands of death from it and don't mandate exercise, don't criminalize eating a Big Mac or smoking or any number of other self-health decisions. Same with cancer and everything else we talk about. We do recommend huge public information and prevention campaigns. And even still, they don't get us to the flu. That's the thing they don't want us talking about, especially because, of course, one can legitimately call that contagious. So we are told it's irrelevant. Our point is not the transmissibility or rate of transmissibility. It's that we shall not, have not, and should not overreact to this as we have not with everything else and far worse things. And why? Because as we say again and again, there is public health and there is public health. Yes, there is the risk of getting the coronavirus. 0.2% chance of getting it. Depending on where you live, that could be a little higher or a lot lower. If you get it, again, if you get it, there's a 96% chance of full recovery. Actually, given some of the models out of Oxford University, for example, those numbers could be much, much better, as it's possible 50% of us already had it and were asymptomatic or had symptoms and recovered already without knowing it. But okay, you know the numbers, and there is that health problem, and it's a public health problem. But there are other public health problems too. The second public health we mention when we say there's public health and there's public health, because some of us still give a big damn about depression and suicide ideation and alcohol and drug abuse and domestic violence. And we know those numbers will rise with the mediations that have been enforced and encouraged from the coronavirus. Some already have. Now add unemployment, and you have a driver of a set of pathologies this country hadn't solved in the first place, but instead is making much, much worse. You have an accelerant to those pathologies. Maybe the Washington Post and the Washington Monthly and the sanitation virtue signalists can tell me, too, that depression and suicide ideation and alcohol and drug abuse and domestic violence aren't transmissible contagions as well. There is something, though, delicate, and we must broach it because we have assumed it with every other problem in our country. And that is the notion that there are things worse than a rare illness that affects not everyone and not everyone equally. Things so much worse we don't usually stand for them. Social and civic destruction, shredding of our rights and liberties. There is something called civic health, too. If there weren't, to my friends on the left, then I suggest they explain to me why we all need to support charities and tax-exempt organizations that they like, including the arts. We may have different ideas of what constitutes civic health, but we all believe in it. There's a wonderful line in that wonderful movie, Seabiscuit. Remember the horse's jockey, Red Pollard? He had a broken leg that was on the mend, and he really wanted to ride Seabiscuit again while he was on the mend. Seabiscuit's owner was worried if Red did that and had an accident that he may never walk again. He asked for the thoughts of an even more famous jockey who knew how to ride Seabiscuit and had also ridden him in the past, George Wolfe. He asked him, what happens if Red gets bumped or jostled? Wolfe, known as the Iceman, says, quote, you know what I think? I think it's better to break a man's leg than his heart, close quote. Telling able and willing people they cannot work. Telling able and willing employers they cannot employ. Bringing on a second pandemic of social destruction with our mental health system. Drawing up funding to auxiliary organizations dedicated to helping our mental health system. Closing our schools. Closing our churches and synagogues for something that will end up looking like the flu in America, which we have every year. That breaks a country, its heart and its soul. We, so many of us, used to know these things. We used to know life was worth risking for some things, our country and way of life, for one. What, after all, do people think Union soldiers meant when they sang the battle hymn of the Republic with the lyrics, as he died to make men holy, we shall die to make men free? What was thought of sending men to war abroad in any of our wars, or for that matter, taking up arms against Great Britain in the first place to found ourselves? What was meant by something everyone used to say, give me liberty or give me death? All of this during the 1950s and 1960s were popular notions. So popular that Ronald Reagan, as president, could say this in a major speech in 1983. He said, a number of years ago, I heard a young father, a very prominent young man in the entertainment world, addressing a tremendous gathering in California. As during the time of the Cold War and communism and our own way of life were very much on people's minds. And he was speaking to that subject, and suddenly I heard him saying, I love my little girls more than anything. And I said to myself, oh no, don't. You can't. Don't say that. But I had underestimated him, Reagan said. He went on to say, I would rather see my little girls die now still believing in God than have them grow up under communism and one day die no longer believing in God. Close quote. There were thousands of young people in that audience, Reagan said. They came to their feet with shouts of joy. They had instantly recognized the profound truth in what he had said. with regard to the physical and the soul and what was truly important in our world. So let us turn back against this crisis industrial complex, this vested interest in our lockdown and shutdown. The numbers come nothing close to any rational justification for it, or for the wave of harm we will see not from it, the disease, but as a result of how we are handling it. We are too good to keep this nonsense, this amnesia, this forsaking up. We're too good for that. But more importantly, it's just not American. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.